with me. A lonely mountain man bought her for $2, but she taught him how to love. They say some days fate doesn't knock gently. It kicks the damn door down in a cloud of dust. That was the day Eli Turner came down from the mountain for the first time in nearly 10 years. Not to see anyone, not to start over, but just to buy a horse. Instead, he ended up buying a person. Eli lived alone up on the Timberline Ridge, where the wind stayed cold year-round and the snow fell thick as sweat mixed with road dust. He had no wife, no friends, not even one of those loyal dogs folks liked to write songs about. Just a chipped-handled axe, a lopsided cabin that leaned toward the mountains like it, too, wanted to disappear from the world, and a few hens that hadn't laid eggs in years. For 10 winters straight, Eli had spoken to no one but squirrels and his own shadow under the cold moonlight. But that winter, he needed a new horse. The old one had slipped into a ravine, and no one buried it. That's just how it was. Eli had no choice but to come down the mountain, though his heart stayed behind. Red Hollow, a dusty border town, didn't have much to offer in the season of cutting wind. Just cheap liquor that burned too fast, a few cracked harmonica tunes wheezing out of doorways, and the narrow-eyed stares of men with nothing to lose but a few coins in their pockets. Eli hadn't planned to linger. He would buy the horse and be gone, but life has a way of grabbing men like him by the collar just when they think they're slipping out the back door. He was just about to turn away when a loud burst of laughter rolled up from the far end of the street. Looked like some kind of auction was happening out in the open, right there on the warped wooden porch of the local saloon. Curious, Eli slipped into the shadows along the wall, eyes squinting through the dust. A crowd had gathered like flies to spilled whiskey. One man was trying to sell a chipped axe, another a pair of boots with holes in the soles, and an old woman had even laid out moldy bread, displayed like it was fine silver. In Red Hollow, anything could be sold, if it was cheap enough. Except character. That had been traded off long ago. Just as Eli was about to leave, the auctioneer, a hunched man with a beard the color of scorched brick, motioned for something to be dragged forward. A large burlap sack, lumpy and tied tight from top to bottom, like a giant sack of potatoes. But no one laughed this time, every eye fixed on the sack as if they already knew what was inside, but didn't dare be the first to say it out loud. The air turned thick. The only sounds were the shuffling of cards and the soft, uneasy breath of people realizing that something had crossed a line they'd all been pretending didn't exist. The burlap sack shifted slightly as the old man yanked it upright onto the rotting wooden platform. He gave a sharp tilt of his chin, tapping the sack like he was showing off some rare corn crop he'd just dug up after a long dry season. The crowd below responded just as expected. Some laughed, some winced, others turned their heads, but still snuck glances out of the corners of their eyes. Everyone knew there was a person inside. They just didn't want to be the first to say it. "She cooks, she cleans. Don't talk back," the red-bearded man announced, like he was hawking a walking broom. $2. Who wants her?" Silence. Maybe because everyone knew. There are some things, no matter how cheap, you can't buy without forfeiting sleep. A blacksmith barked out a laugh. "Hell, I ain't even done paying off my last wife." That got a round of thunderous laughter. An old woman pushing a cart of firewood muttered, "Probably stole something. Now they're selling her to settle the debt." Someone else snorted, "Or maybe she volunteered. Tired of life, figured she'd rather be fed than free." Amid all the noise, the jeers, and the dust-stained cynicism, Eli Turner didn't move. He just stood there, eyes locked on the burlap sack. No one could say for sure what was behind his stare, only that it was still. Too still. Like a lake just before the storm breaks. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was pity, or maybe, just maybe, it was that quiet, forgotten place inside a man, a place someone had once walked away from, now whispering, "Say something." And then Eli raised his hand. "I'll take her," he said. He said it like he was accepting a sack of potatoes or some half-starved stray cat that wandered into his yard looking for shelter. A beat of silence. Then laughter burst from the crowd, like someone had smacked a hornet's nest of drunks. "He ain't even got a proper bed." The saloon keeper wheezed through a cackle. Bet he'll shove her in the wood box and let her sleep with the chickens." Eli didn't answer. He just walked forward, pulled 2 crumpled dollar bills from his coat pocket, and handed them over. No one bothered to check if they were real. Not in Red Hollow. Here, shame was worth more than cash, and Eli had just bought a full load of it for $2. The red-bearded man gave a slow nod and backed away, like he'd just closed a deal he hoped no one would remember. And then the sack moved. Slowly the girl stood up. No one helped her. No one dared. She didn't remove the sack. She simply turned and stepped down from the platform, her small feet silent and certain, like someone who hadn't walked roads much, but had walked through far worse. Eli turned around, didn't call to her, didn't ask questions, didn't reach for her. But she followed, as if she'd heard something no one else did. Someone whistled behind them. Someone else muttered, "She'll run soon enough." But the girl kept walking, quiet, steady. No names were exchanged, no stories told. Just 2 people, 1 road, and a single sentence spoken without fanfare, but powerful enough to change everything. "Come with me." As for whatever came after that, only God and the man from the mountain would ever know. Eli. Turner brought the girl back to his cabin, a place no one ever came to, tucked away between a jagged ridge and a line of old pine trees. No neighbors, no voices, just wind, the scent of damp snow, and the crunch of his boots each morning as he checked on the chicken coop. That first night, she asked for nothing. No questions about food, no questions about where to sleep. She quietly folded up the burlap sack, set it in the corner like it was an old pillow she'd grown used to, then sat down in the wooden chair by the stove and began mending the sleeve of his coat. The same coat that had been falling apart since the winter his grandfather died. Eli didn't say thank you. She didn't look up. Only the sound of the needle pushing through threadbare cloth broke the silence. Steady, rhythmic, like a clock ticking down to something unnamed, but inevitable. Day after day, she moved through the cabin like a ghost who'd decided to start housekeeping. She swept the floors, started the fires, cooked, washed. No instruction, no complaint. But strangest of all, she never took off the burlap hood when she slept. Every night, she curled up on an old quilt, wrapped herself from crown to heel in that rough sack like she was trying to hide not just her face, but her entire existence. Eli didn't ask, not because he wasn't curious. He was. But something inside him whispered that if he asked, the answer would drag something dark into their quiet world, something heavy enough to sink them both. Still, some truths show themselves whether you're ready or not. One morning, a horse bit Eli on the heel. Normally, he'd panic, fumble like a man with 2 left hands. But she stepped in without a word, grabbed a few herbs from behind the stove, crushed them in her palms, wrapped the wound in clean cloth. Efficient, like she'd done it 100 times before. "Where'd you learn that?" he asked. She said nothing, didn't even meet his eyes. Another time, he caught her digging through an old chest of books, sitting by the fire writing something with a dip pen. Her hand trembled slightly, nervous, maybe, but her writing was swift and elegant. When he stepped into the room, she didn't flinch. She simply burned the paper in the stove, letting the flames swallow it, leaving only smoke, and a glance sharp enough to cut through pine. That's when Eli realized something. You don't learn how to treat wounds, write with a fountain pen, and jot notes in Old French just from scrubbing dishes. And just like that, questions began to fester in his mind, a mind that had always believed the world was no more complicated than planting corn and chopping wood. She wasn't a runaway whore, wasn't a scared housemaid, wasn't some lost village girl. She was too composed, too precise, too aware of every little thing she did. One night, Eli sat alone with a bottle by the fire, watching her fold laundry in the flicker of lamplight. The burlap sack still covered her head, her movements slow, methodical, like a wooden statue that somehow learned how to breathe, and Eli thought to himself, some folks wear sacks over their heads because someone else wants to hide them, but some do it themselves because they don't want to be seen. He didn't know who he had brought into his home, but he knew, without a doubt, she wasn't a $2 purchase. She was a question, a dangerous, deliberate, unspoken question that no one else had dared to read aloud. That night's rain cut straight to the bone. The cabin roof creaked and moaned like it was whispering old regrets to the forest. Wind slipped through the gaps in the wooden walls, carrying the scent of wet earth and the chill of secrets that had never been aired out. Eli sat by the stove, holding a frayed wool sweater in his hands. It belonged to Martha, the only woman who ever said his name twice in a row. She'd been gone for 7 years, and yet the sweater still carried the scent of cheap soap and tears that had never quite washed away. He hadn't worn it since. No one had. But tonight, Eli took it out, because the person across from him was shivering. She sat in the corner of the room, back against the wall, still wearing that burlap sack over her head like a hood of shame. Rain lashed against the windows, but not a single complaint left her lips. The only thing trembling was her hands, clutching her knees, still and silent like dry, rotting wood. Eli laid the sweater down on the floor near her. Didn't say a word. Because what could he say, when they both knew the cold in that room wasn't just from the weather? Time passed. The fire burned low, crackling like an old man clearing his throat. And then he heard the rustle of cloth. He turned, and for the first time since she stepped foot in his cabin, she took off the burlap. Eli froze, not because she was beautiful, though God she was, in a way no one should be. Not after being sold off like cattle in the street, not because her skin was smoother than he'd imagined, or because her jet black hair was tied back with quiet precision. No, it was her eyes. They weren't scared. They weren't soft. They weren't pleading. They were cold. The eyes of someone who had stared into the abyss and walked away from it. Before Eli could say anything, she spoke. Her voice low, steady, each word carved out like a practiced oath. I wasn't sold. I volunteered. The room stopped breathing. The wind slammed against the outer walls, but inside only 2 people remained, and a sentence that shattered everything Eli thought he knew, like an old cabin roof giving way in a storm. What? He asked, voice hoarse as scorched timber. I said, she repeated, calm as the grave, I stepped onto that stage by choice. That auctioneer didn't force me, if anything. He was scared. Scared of what? Eli whispered. She looked him dead in the eyes, for the first time. Scared I'd tell the truth about what he did. Eli didn't ask another thing, because deep down he knew the next answer might be something he didn't deserve to hear. She pulled on the sweater slowly, tugging the sleeves down over her wrists like she wasn't just putting on warmth, but a new skin, a layer between herself and the world. The burlap sack lay crumpled on the floor now, like a snake's shed skin. Nobody wore it anymore, but its presence still lingered in the room. A smell of something old, damp, and dangerous. Eli leaned back in his chair and watched her, for a long time. Only one thought looped in his mind. If she's not a slave, then who the hell is she? And from that moment on, this was no longer a story about a lonely woodsman buying someone for cheap. It became a story about a man who just bet his life on a mystery he was never meant to touch. Ever since the night she removed the burlap, Eli hadn't asked a single question. He didn't press for her name, because she never offered it, and he'd long stopped demanding things she wasn't ready to give. But strangely enough, things began to change without a single word spoken. Eli fixed the roof, the same roof he'd ignored for years, letting wind seep in, rain pool on the floor. He propped up the rotting beams, replaced a few warped planks. Not out of worry, but simply because someone else lived under it now. She didn't touch his axes or saws, but she taught him how not to burn the bottom of a bread loaf, showed him how to keep greens fresh longer with ash from the stove, how to plant herbs by the fence, where even the deer wouldn't dare nibble. Then one morning, Eli walked inside and paused. The cabin smelled different, not of smoke, not damp wood, but of something alive. Flour, sun-dried cloth, herbs hanging in the window, a scent he hadn't known since the day Martha was lowered into the ground. They still didn't talk much, but every morning the teapot was already warm. Every night she'd lay his shirts near the stove to dry. No laughter, no touches. But every small act was a thread, sewing a human shape back into a space that once held only shadows. And yet, for all the quiet comfort, Eli knew something wasn't settled. Every night, she stepped out onto the porch, facing south. She didn't linger, just a few minutes. But the way she stood there, hand resting gently on the railing, eyes locked on the darkness like it might spit someone out, it chilled him. A few times, he caught her writing something in a small leather notebook. By morning, the page would be gone. Once, trying to sound casual, Eli asked, "Writing a journal?" She gave a soft smile, shook her head. Not no, but you don't need to know. One afternoon, while they planted turnips, she told him to tilt the soil a bit more so water wouldn't pool after the rain. Eli froze. She knew how to guide runoff. She knew how to work the land like someone who'd done it for years. The questions gnawed at him, like termites under floorboards, but he still didn't ask, not because he didn't want to know, but because he was learning. Some people only stay if you're willing to live with what they're not ready to tell. The mountain wind grew colder by the day, but Eli's cabin was warmer than it had ever been. She never said, I am staying. But each morning there was tea. Each night his clothes were folded. No promises, but presents, no words of love. But a fire started early, so he wouldn't wake to a frozen spine. Still, something was coming. A person doesn't burn pages if they're just hiding words. They're hiding someone. And that southern horizon she stared at each night, sooner or later someone would come from it. That morning there was no rain, but a strange chill hung in the air. Not the kind that comes with wind, the kind that came from instinct, from a man who'd lived too long alone. Eli was splitting wood in the yard when he heard the sound of hooves. Slow, measured, not bootleggers, not a lost ranch hand, the kind of steps made by men who know they're not welcome. The man who knocked wore a dust-covered gray-black coat, average build, voice like water drawn from an old well, cold, quiet, needing no emphasis. "My name's Thomas. I'm with the Federal Bureau. We're looking for a missing woman, the only living witness in the assassination of Senator McCarthy last year." Eli frowned. He'd never heard that name in these parts. But the moment it left the man's lips, he felt the air shift behind him. No sound, but it was as if the room itself had forgotten how to breathe. Thomas didn't press. He just studied Eli the way a man weighs the soul of a mountaineer. "We have reason to believe she's hiding somewhere in this region. Young woman, fair skin, black hair, disappeared after a hearing. Highly probable she's ex-military." Eli shook his head. "Just me here, a few chickens, and a quiet stranger I took in. She doesn't say much." The agent nodded, didn't argue. But just before he turned to leave, he glanced inside the cabin, and his eyes landed square on a face frozen like wet wood. The door shut. The horse rode off. But the air inside never quite returned to normal. That afternoon, with sunlight slicing sideways through the window, touching the still trees outside, Eli set his cup down. She stood at the basin, back turned, drying dishes. "That name, McCarthy, you knew it, didn't you?" She didn't look back, just exhaled, slowly, then dried her hands, pulled out a chair, and sat across from him like someone who had waited years for this moment. "I used to work for them." The words landed like a needle bursting a balloon stuffed too full of secrets. "Intelligence. I was sent in to track a network laundering money and weapons. We were close until they turned on me." "Who turned on you?" Eli asked, low. "The whole system. My superiors. The same people who called me partner. They used me as bait, and when everything unraveled, they needed someone to disappear. Permanently." She lowered her head, voice barely above a whisper, like telling a sad dream from another life. They torched my safe house, faked my death in the files. I got out minutes before, ran through the woods all night. No ID, no name, no one left to call. Eli's hands tightened on the chair arms. And the burlap sack! She nodded. A way to vanish for real. I found my way to the auction. Told the MC if he bagged me up and sold me, I'd help him dispose of a stolen shipment he was panicked about. In exchange, he had to give me away. To anyone. As long as they didn't ask questions, cunt. Eli gave a dry laugh, the kind that hurts more than it relieves. And you picked me. No. She met his eyes. I didn't pick anyone, but you were the first man who didn't ask who I was. And maybe that's what I really needed. And just like that. Eli understood. She wasn't a girl who'd been sold, not a maid, not someone waiting to be rescued. She was someone who had lived and died in the way governments bury secrets. And he, by accident or grace, was the first person to reach out without needing to strip her past for proof. Wind slipped through the cracks in the cabin walls again. But this time, Eli didn't shiver. He only felt this. His cabin had just become the last refuge for a story the government never wanted told. The government doesn't knock to say hello. They come to tear up the dirt, dig out the secrets, and bury the ones who know deeper than any grave can reach. Eli knew that. She did too. After the agent left, the cabin stopped breathing. Every footstep on the wood floor echoed louder than usual. Every gust of wind on the porch sounded like a question no one dared to ask. She spoke even less now, though truth be told, she'd never been one for words. And Eli, he didn't ask either, because he knew. The real question wasn't, who is she? It was, what will she do now? They lived a few more days like nothing had happened. But the silence, it wasn't warm anymore. It smelled like goodbye, like ash in a winter stove that had gone cold overnight. Then came a moonless night. She folded her blanket earlier than usual. By the dim lamplight, Eli saw her packing. Not much, just a few light things. Enough to say she was leaving. And this time, maybe for good. Eli stood in the doorway, leaning against the post, a mug of cold tea in hand. He didn't say, stay. Didn't say, don't go. He just watched as the woman who once stepped out of a burlap sack like rising from the dead, now prepared to walk into yet another battle against the very people who once demanded her death. When she set her bag by the door, Eli finally spoke. Slow, as if each word had to be chewed through first. You once chose to hide by coming here. But if you're choosing to leave now, then please, don't look back. Not for me. She looked at him, didn't smile, didn't cry, just nodded, soft, like the promise had already been written on her heart long before tonight. The next morning, when Eli woke, the stove still held a trace of heat. The tea had been steeped, the bread still crisp, smelling faintly of herbs, just like every other morning. Only one thing was different. The chair across the table was empty. She was gone. No slammed door, no tears, no rush, just a folded letter on the table, thick paper, ink smudged at the corner, like maybe someone had hesitated before writing. Eli sat down, read slow, as if reading the last words of someone still alive but already out of reach. Thank you for never asking what I couldn't say. You taught me what kindness sounds like when it has no name. No signature, but he didn't need one. Because the woman who left that note had lived beside him with no name, no past, no promised future, only a present stitched together by quiet acts of grace. Eli didn't cry, he just sat there, staring out toward the woods, the same woods she once came from, wrapped in burlap, like a ghost delivered from somewhere between life and forgetting. And now, she'd left again, like the wind, light as if she never truly belonged to this place. But for once in his life, Eli had been chosen to be the refuge for a nameless soul. And the strangest part? It wasn't her who had been saved. It was him. Eli never found out if she was still alive or taken. No news came. And in these mountains, news came after the snow, and truth, Well, it often lost its way. Some said they saw a girl heading south, gray sweater, small pack on her back. Others claimed the agents had taken care of the witness. But Eli, he didn't go down to town asking, didn't dig, didn't chase leads, because sometimes not knowing is the only way to keep believing. He kept living in that cabin, though it had changed. The old fence wasn't leaning like broken ribs anymore. The herb garden by the stove smelled of garlic and onions. Bundles of dried leaves hung under the eaves, not to eat, but to remember. Eli woke up earlier these days, didn't let the coffee boil over like he used to. Now he knew how to keep the flame low. He scattered crushed eggshells under the tomato beds, learned that carrots need mounding after rain. He even built a little chicken coop. The hens didn't do much but scratch and squawk, but hearing them in the morning, Eli felt less alone in his silence. Every time he passed the table, his eyes still fell on the empty seat across from him. Not with pain, not with regret, just memory. And the memory wasn't sad. It was the echo of someone who came into his life without taking anything, only leaving behind a new way to live. One afternoon, a man from town stopped by, asked, half joking, "That girl you bought last year, who was she really?" Eli smiled, his voice thick with old smoke and older sorrow. "She was the one who taught me how to grow back what I'd once let die." The man squinted. "You mean, like, vegetables?" Eli chuckled softly. "No, I mean a reason to live." Their love never had a shared bed. No vows, no silver rings, just a man fixing a broken roof so someone else wouldn't get wet. And a woman who brewed morning tea, then vanished before sunrise, leaving behind a cabin just warm enough for a heart that once turned to stone. Some folks love with flowers, some with wedding bands. But Eli, he loved by learning not to let the kettle boil over, by no longer asking, by just listening to someone breathe and knowing they were still there. And when they left, he didn't hold on to the person. He held on to the life they taught him to live. The mountain wind still slipped through the cracks in the door, reminding him no one stays forever. But this time, Eli didn't close it, because if one day she ever came back, she'd need to see a light still on. Not to be loved again, but to know she once was. Loved, quietly, in a way no one else ever had. If that last story touched something inside you, then let the next one take you even deeper, to an ending you won't forget anytime soon. Click the video on the screen.